Okay, it's March 12th, 2026. My name is Jessa. This is Santiago. Oh, no, you should introduce yourself.
I'm Santiago.
And we're here to rant. A few things on the agenda today, but obviously the war on Iran, in Iran, around Iran, Iran related hostilities. I'm never sure how to even describe these conflicts anymore, but that is top of mind, I think, for a lot of people. So we'll give some updates there, but more constructively, we'll look at Canadian politicians' responses to it and talk about why we can't get any much information about what's going on. We're also going to talk about Al Quds Day in Toronto and the attempts to crack down on Palestinian solidarity activists. There's always news on that front. Doug Ford, we haven't talked about him in a while. He is up to no good at the waterfront, and students also are irate with him. And the NDP have a floor crosser of their own this time. Carney gets even closer to a majority, and we'll talk about what that means for Canadian politics and the NDP itself. Then we've got some disruptive updates for the end, some folks causing good trouble, and just some. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. So, Iran, I don't know. The images we can get yesterday were disturbing, which is hard to say after what we've witnessed for the last, 2.5+ years. But I mean, like massive explosions in and around Tehran as well as Beirut. But like some of the bombs that they were dropping yesterday were massive. Massive. I'm sure we'll find out exactly what munitions they were using, but the death tolls in both Lebanon and Iran are climbing. The Americans, I think, have lost, or at least will admit to losing 7 soldiers. And it's hard to say what's happening. I mean, Trump says they're almost done. This is a quick war. They've taught Iran a lesson. He has some ridiculous statement about them being the losers of the Middle East now. But nothing seems to be de-escalating. Do you think this will drag on?
Oh God, I have no earthly idea. Honestly, what one thing we were talking before we started filming was like just how hard it is to stay informed about what's happening in Iran. There's so much, not just propaganda, but just like blatantly, like just like yeah, like misinformation that is being spread on social media. That like the effort it takes to dig through everything to find what is a more accurate representation of what's happening. It's difficult. It's a lot of effort, and it's quite exhausting with how horrible what's happening is. So from there to knowing what's gonna happen, God, I have no clue. I just know, like, sorry, it's
Well, you were saying earlier how strange it was that with what happens in Gaza, we feel like we get every bit of it, right? We get updates, we get video, numbers, like all the horrific details. But there has been a bit of a blackout. Like getting what's happening in Iran is very difficult. But also what's happening in Tel Aviv, the damage that's being done inside Israel is hard to get, hard to verify. And, it really feels
mm-hmm.
like there's a different level of suppression on the algorithm. We're always complaining about it, right? Like, that doesn't cross my feed. I have to really dig. But this is another level of that. Like, you almost have to know somebody
Yeah.
in order to get accurate information. And even then,
Yeah, and especially even like the last few days, I feel like I've gone from seeing things all over my social medias to having a lot less. Like it feels like they're just trying to like like news cycle's done, go focus on something else, don't worry about what's happening in Iran. That's
Well, everyone knows something's going on because you're at the gas pumps. That's your first clue. Let's say you're living in your own little bubble. You must have popped up to wonder what the hell happened to your gas prices. But I mean, yeah, like Trump's going like, oh, he can end it any time. That's the kind of text that you saw rolling across the screen there, and it's just so absurd. Uh, what about Iran, right? Or Israel? Israel doesn't seem done. I want to. One of the things too that Iran keeps coming up. Iran keeps coming up, but Lebanon. That part is really not hitting the news cycle at all. I think Carney made like a really brief statement. He wasn't happy about what was going on there. But the reality is, and I don't think a lot of folks realize this, that like during the so called ceasefire, Israel bombed Lebanon more than they had during that war in the last 2 years, and did more damage and caused more casualties. So this isn't new. This is another level of escalation, but it's really kind of been something that's been happening um, without most folks paying attention. And I want to talk about Carney. Like, we can talk about Trump, but everything he says is ridiculous. He's so hard to predict. It almost seems like futile to try. But Carney's he's proven to be a bit of a slick talker.
hmm.
um, I was admiring Carolyn Levitt the other day in the worst way. I was like, man, she doesn't lose a step. She's able to get up there and lie and say the most outrageous things and defend the most abhorrent man in his, that we can think of right now. And she just doesn't flinch. Like, she's good at that, right? At a horrible activity. But Carney is more suave of a politician than I think maybe I gave him credit for when I thought he was just a banker. We saw it with his throne speech. Then we saw it with
Mm-hmm.
Davos, right? People were really hyped about his speech at Davos, even if they don't like him. They're like, oh, that was just really um, diplomatic. And he speaks in ways that allows people to hear what they want to hear. But he really is talking out of both sides of his mouth now. Like, I'm going to pull up, let's see where he jumped from. So I think this was just a week ago. He's asked when he gives a full-throated support of the initial bombings, right? Until he finds out that Tomahawks double tapped an elementary school, killing like 200 school kids. He walked it back like the tiniest amount, but he was asked, will Canada participate? And what does he say here? His quote is like, it can't be ruled out. He was weighing his options as though this thought had just occurred to him, right? Like, this question was like a surprise. Oh, well, we can't rule that out. So the date on that is we're at March 5th. We're recording this on March 12th, but he was asked again in the House what the chances were. He wasn't there for question period, and they were mocking him for that. They didn't, that's not the time to maybe step away to go celebrate Ramadan when he's not even Muslim. He dodged question period for that. But now when you ask him, he says Canada will never participate. That although he is really worried about the Strait of Hormuz and the economic impacts of everything, and I think he even shows a little bit of respect for international law, but the same order that he says does nothing. He says, absolutely, we will not participate. So, do you believe him?
I mean, I kind of almost feel like it's not fully up to him. Like, I feel like there's ways that like Canada can get pressured into joining it that that I feel like might work. Like I feel like I don't know.
Like, should something awful happen?
Yeah, I mean that's one case. I also just think like there's like talks about like depending on if Turkey gets involved that Turkey could drag Canada in through like NATO shit. Like
Oh,
I
here we
won't
go with
pretend
NATO
to
again.
be like an expert on the inner workings of NATO and like their agreements with each other. It usually disgusts me too much to pay that close attention. So like I don't know, like it would be catastrophic, but you can't. I feel like you can't really trust what anyone here is saying at the moment.
Well, not when he was just considering it
Yeah,
9 days ago. Now he's gaslighting us, pretending like, no, no way. There's no way I would ever consider that. And I was like, well, I don't know. I can think of a lot of circumstances that you might. And then if you read his language here, like I want to highlight, Canada's stance is clear. Canada supports the necessity to prevent Iran's nuclear program and the export of terrorism. So he shows no concern for what's happening like in the region, right? He still tells us and reminds us that his interests are the Americans' interests and the Israelis' interests, like their expressed interests, but he's not willing to do anything about it. And I think that's real rich to be able to stand there and say that, and he'll fool a lot of people because they'll agree with bits and parts of what he says because he's saying everything but yet nothing. But the reality is, like, Canadians have troops on bases in the Middle East. It's on some of the bases that are being targeted by Iran because they have um, U.S. forces on them, right? They are part of the staging grounds for the attacks on them, whether that's like anti-aircraft or whether they're launching munitions from there, whether planes are taking off from there. I mean, there's all sorts of ways military can be involved with one another. And so, like, there's Canadians over there. And then we know that we help arm both the Americans and the occupation, right? And just yesterday, there was a vote in the House of Commons and the Liberals worked with the Conservatives to shut down a bill brought by Jenny Kwan of the NDP that would have helped close that loophole we've talked about on Blueprints of Disruption so many times, where arms are still going to Israel through the United States from Canada. And even though Carney will stand there and he'll tell us, absolutely, this doesn't happen. If there are any loopholes, like there shouldn't be. But when a bill's brought to him to shut down those loopholes, most of the liberals coalesced and shot it down. So we're far from neutral. But he stands up there looking like a real diplomat, saying, he'd rather talk it all out, talk the nuclear program down, and what is this exporting of terrorism? He's talking about working with the Americans, and then he's chastising Iran for exporting terrorism. And you know what he means by that? He means Hezbollah and Hamas. Usually that's what they're referring to.
mm-hmm.
Or they're talking about attacks on the homeland. And like this is all like said to us for a certain agenda, right? He never drops any of these comments without purpose and thoughtfulness.
Yeah. Sure. Is it even worth pointing out the irony, which is that like both of those things are things that Israel does constantly, right? Like, I mean, they have their nuclear program. They won't admit to it, but it's kind of like the worst kept secret ever. Everyone knows. And then I've said it before. Like Israel doesn't get enough shit for exporting. Uh, sure, let's use their word terrorism to places like Latin America, where they train paramilitaries who go on to kill leftists, union leaders, social leaders, across the country constantly. I mean, this is, I know about it most in Colombia, but it happens across Latin America, right? Like, what fucking businesses Israel have there? Well, it's very clear when you look at their alliance with the U.S., right?
Yeah.
So it's yeah. There's just a great irony, and Carney's just the wording's just so perfect for it to go like either way, right? Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it just takes a little excuse, and suddenly we're all in.
Yeah. And I just want to mention too that Canada did sweet fuck all to help people who were stranded in countries that are being bombed. So folks trapped in Lebanon or Iran that have Canadian passports or have residency in Canada, they knew it. They made announcements that they had been contacted by over 2,000 people requesting their assistance, and their only advice to them was really to just find flights out of the area. So uh, mind you, most airlines were not flying in and out of these areas. So, yeah, I had frustrations with it. There's certain services our taxes should provide, man. And, if this had been happening in other places, there would have been a scramble to repatriate some folks. But
I mean, did they the UAE?
you
Or did
never
they?
know. They didn't brag about it. So whether arrangements were made for some
Because there's
wealthier
definitely
Canadians.
plentiful Canadian
Yeah.
passports in Dubai or Abu Dhabi or
I
fucking Qatar, Bahrain,
I
all
think
the money.
TMZ reported Lindsay Lohan was safe from the hostilities in Dubai. It's like, are you folks kidding me? Other kind of, I know you don't like me referring to it as pop culture or anything, but other kind of fallout from this conflict is Iran has pulled out of the World Cup, and Santiago doesn't know what to do with himself. There's a lot of soccer fans, football fans, that you know fuck are just cringing at this FIFA board of peace collaboration, the disaster that this World Cup is going to be in the United States, drawing all sorts of footballers from the very countries that it hates and like bars from migrating there. And so, yeah, Iran's kind of made it official. They're not going to be in it, even though they qualified. I'm glad I'm not planning that. I can't imagine what the logistics are to replace a team now at the last minute. Um, you're gonna Canada is in the World Cup.
Well, it's easy. They can just replace Iran with Israel and then they'll be happy, right? Israel finally manages to qualify for a World Cup.
Well, they don't play in that group. But they qualify against Europeans,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I
right?
forgot.
You
I
forgot.
totally forgot that. Yeah, Israel somehow counts as
They can't
UEFA.
Yeah, they can't
Uh,
decide whether they're European or whether they are in fact indigenous to the Middle East, because they definitely can't ball with their ballers, but they never qualify because they're forced to qualify against European teams who are actually good. Whereas Israel is shit, so they did not make it.
I mean, even Italy beat them, and Italy's been horrible.
But they were welcome at the Olympics. Not really welcome. I mean, these global sporting bodies are just as bad as our governments, for fuck's sakes, right? Like, they will totally bar Russia at the blink of an eye. Not that Ukraine conflict is a blink of an eye, but they were, demonized well before that
But
as
it
well.
was quick,
Yeah,
like even like I think of like in F1 there was like a Russian driver and like immediately they just like fired him like after the conflict broke up. I mean, he was shit, but
it gave him an excuse. But yeah,
yeah,
no, and
like but
it's
like that was like immediately. Like that was like immediately they got rid. Like it was such a quick reaction. Now they're like dragging their feet. It's
and it seems
the
uncontroversial when it's Russian, right? Like, nobody questions it. It's like, but you'd totally be called anti-Semitic if you took Israel out of any of these competitions. But um, we know how that goes. We know how that goes. Saturday is Friday technically is Al Quds Day uh, in Toronto, and London is at it again. So we didn't get to really talk about this, but long story short, Palestine Action was deemed a terrorist organization in the UK. Thousands of people were charged. Their higher courts overturned that, because it was unconstitutional or against whatever kind of charter that they've got going on over there. My apologies for not being up to date on what they do there. But either way, despite this, despite that kind of validation from the courts and the fact that most of the activists that were even charged with other criminal acts not related to the terrorist act, you know, for going into Elbit systems and destroying equipment and whatnot, they were all exonerated. But they will not let up. The Metropolitan Police that covers the London area, they had requested that the Al Quds Day march not take place in London. So this is a day to celebrate solidarity with Palestine and to protest the illegal occupation that we call Israel. And that obviously rubs a lot of people the wrong way, the people who've been trying to shut this down from day one. So leading up to Al Quds Day in Toronto, there's a buzz and attempts from the usual suspects to try to shut this down. Does that surprise you, Santiago? No.
Nothing surprises me anymore, you know? I mean... Sorry. What did you say?
I was going to say that's very true. I was like, maybe that's not a very good question to ask you, like whether or not it surprises you. But it's like... It feels like it's all part of this pattern that we've seen before. That's kind of delicate to talk about. Yes? Let me pull this up. It'll give us a talking point to start on. But Toronto police, like, apparently under crazy amounts of pressure, right? We know who that is, that are on the phone calling them, pressuring them to shut this down. They like it's a charity case. They've said, okay, fine, you folks can go ahead, but they've come with some really strong warnings. And the language that they're using to, you know, warn folks what they'll tolerate and what they won't is here, that they won't tolerate anyone obstructing police, engaging in violence, which is a given, or hate speech. Well, when they mean anyone, they don't mean themselves, right? Yeah. They can engage in violence, but that obstructing police is a common one, that is pretty frivolous and arbitrary. You get in their way. When they tried to deliberately be in your way with the horses and the lines that they used to obstruct folks. But that hate speech language that they are incorporating is important. Again, it's like Carney's statements. It's very thought out. And it's tied into the new legislation that Carney is passing related to expanding what is considered hate speech, hate symbols, and leaving that decision up to a cabinet minister. So to me, it feels like they're laying the groundwork here to be able to explicitly kind of name things that are related to Palestine or Iran, especially Iran, as being unacceptable, and reasons that they will either shut it down, react with violence, and then lay a whole bunch of charges against people. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to see how folks will respond, whether they will maybe downplay the day or act defiant. In London, they're promising that they are still going to show up for Al Quds Day, but they won't try to march. It'll be static. So they are capitulating to some degree, right, to avoid conflict, legal costs, right? Folks have to kind of weigh these decisions that they make, but at the same time, you don't want the state deciding what we can and can't protest, where, how long. And I feel like this might be a testing grounds here on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, we know how the Toronto police is, and we know that hate speech doesn't include those counter protesters that are mentioned in the same article, right? When the Zionists show up, they can get away with just about anything, right? Whether it's nail guns or riding lawnmowers or whatever the fuck they do. Um, so like, I mean, trying to figure out what I want to say because like, you know, me and Jess have been paying a lot of attention to like how the police have been responding to protests, and we saw like, you know, the violence that they demonstrated against like the OSAP protesters the other day. You know, like it's just you can't really like the Toronto police do not respect the right to protest in any form right now. Um, so any protest organized in Toronto at this point, uh, there's never any guarantees about how they'll respond. If they want to shut that down, they have a lot of tactics for how they can shut it down. If they want an excuse to arrest someone, they'll find a way to get an excuse to arrest someone. You know, they have no problem arresting people who have done nothing, knowing that they'll have to release them later, to anger the crowd, to disperse protests, to the myriad of tactics that they use. So it's just another day trying to figure out what they're gonna throw at us next, because there's, I mean, at least in the UK they're calling shit unconstitutional. Here, like, we don't even have like, our proceedings against them are so delayed, are so after the fact. It may be years before we get any, like, we know how much of what they're doing is unconstitutional, or do we use the word unconstitutional when it's charter violations? I don't know what the
Yes, we
language
do.
is. Yeah, like so much of what they do, like everyone knows, it's an open fucking secret how unconstitutional the tactics of the police are. But it'll be years before, if we're lucky, any of that makes its way to a superior court uh, in Canada. So they essentially have free reign to do whatever the fuck they want to us, um, with zero accountability. So
And that's even without the help of this extra legislation, right? Like when the bubble laws were starting to, bylaws were starting to trickle through the municipalities, we asked the Toronto legal support community about, you know, are you worried about these bubble zone laws? How are they going to impact your protests? And their response was the police already operate with complete impunity. They want to bubble around a building, they get a bubble around a building. They just push us away. They act with violence. They tell us that it is against the law when it's not. They arrest us. You know, they've always had these tools to do that, and it's mostly through the lack of accountability. But yeah, then now you've got politicians that are, you know, coordinating their statements and then passing legislation that makes it all that more official. So even when you do mount a court case, it's like they changed the law, right? So if it wasn't it was unconstitutional, and then you add it to the criminal code. And I want to just flag, we talked about it before, but the Bondi Beach shooting was a great but awful example of where politicians were able to use acts of violence in the community to pass laws incredibly fast that were blanket bans on protests. In New South Wales, it was like the wording of the legislation was, you know, within 3 months of a terrorist utterance or act, you know, threat, or like it was really vague wording that the government and with the police's help would be able to ban all protests for 3 months. You know, so they were instances like the three synagogues in Toronto that have been shot at, and then just recently shots were fired at the US consulate. And I mean, all politicians from across the political spectrum made sure to comment on this using almost identical language from one another that had the same feels around that coordination we saw in other events. And
mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I feel like this is all part and parcel, and whatever happens on for Al Quds Day and around that is they will try to manipulate it. They being, you know, the police and the politicians that want fewer rights for protesters, and to silence Palestinian solidarity work. You know, they will be able to manipulate, you know, think Mount Sinai Spider-Man, kind of like think anything and anything, everything can be and will be used to then further kind of frame this as something the laws need to deal with when it's just anti-war protests at this point. So I don't know. This is Canada. People are kind of shocked when I think they find out the level of state interference that goes on with our democratic process. But I
Yeah.
guess that
I was telling my dad about like how the police operate here in Canada, like the impunity they have, and my dad's someone who like he grew up in two places, war torn Lebanon and fucking Colombia during the height of the violence around like Escobar and like narco trafficking in general, and even he was shocked at how there seems to be less tools in place in Canada to hold the police accountable than there were in like Colombia, for example. You know, like that's the part that's really shocking. And like quite frankly, there's less tools than there are in the States, which is even more shocking. A lot of people won't believe that, but when you look at like how often police get held accountable in the States, you know, it's far more often than it is in Canada. There's it really is just complete impunity, and we're just at the mercy of whatever they feel like doing to us. I mean, maybe we won't get locked up because once you have to go through the court proceedings, for the most part, they have trouble like locking people up, but that doesn't matter. That's not their goal.
no, no, and kind of being at the whim, I feel like is a good transition to start talking about Doug Ford
Yeah.
and especially his relationship with the city of Toronto. Um,
A
we
relationship is another word for dictatorship over the city of Toronto.
don't don't you kid yourself. I mean, now he's saying that Olivia Chow is on board, and she hasn't exactly been a force of resistance against him either.
No,
I
no.
surely she is abetting most of the interactions, right? We watched her hand over Ontario Place, right, and Fold on the Science Center as well. So yeah, it let's update people what we're talking about because I'm not sure this gets a whole lot of airplay considering the news cycle that we're talking about. Would you like to do the honors?
Where do we start? The Jets? Should we start with the Jets?
Yeah, like the waterfront. Let's start like the
Yeah.
Jets.
Well, I mean, for people who have like been living anywhere around like the downtown Toronto, um, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with like the No Jets in TO, like the No Jets on the Island campaign that was successful at the time, at preventing jets from being able to fly in and out of and land at Toronto's Billy Bishop Airport, which is, smack dab in the middle on the island. And like concerns were about noise, and that was that was a battle that was fought, that was won by local community leaders um, a while ago now, that and now Doug Ford's just like, nope, we're putting jets and we're gonna reclaim some land, and they're gonna try and expand the airport on the island as well. What was the other bit of land that they wanted to do stuff with?
He wants to also start adding. I'm not 100% sure on the exact location because it's kind of like pie in the sky. So there's the article there where he wants to take over the island airport, but he wants to add landfill and create a new, smaller island that will house a convention center. I'll pull that up as well, but it's this is the one where he claims that he has Olivia Chow's okay. He acknowledges, there might be a few environmental assessments that are needed before this can fly. But he says, the Metro Toronto Convention Center sucks. It kind of does. But he shouldn't be saying that. He shouldn't be saying that. That still brings, like, he's the mayor of our city, and that's really the only convention center we have at the moment. And like, this is going to cost like lots of cash to even, like, we're talking a few $1 billion to build this convention center. And yeah, he wants to make an island out of garbage or landfill.
Which, I mean, we have a rich history of doing in Toronto,
It's
right? Like, I
it's
think
not.
of
Yeah.
Tommy Thompson and what's happening with the Portlands. You know, it's not necessarily like, I gotta be honest. From my perspective, it's not necessarily the fact that we're expanding out. Like, I feel like there is ways to do that are chill, but it's more of just the way that Doug Ford as premier kind of treats Toronto as like he can do whatever he wants there. He can redesign the city however he wants. Um, you know, and like as far as the Jets go, like there's been, like I said, years of like public outrage over this, where there's been a lot of organizing and successful, and just like knowing that, and just like coming in and like just like wielding the hammer of like, you know, he'll do whatever he feels like doing, and like what like, I mean, there shouldn't even really be an airport on the island, you know,
Well,
like
it's all his business over everything else, right? Like, we know his developer friends will make money. There's all sorts of folks in the game that serve to benefit economically from this. But yeah, I our first thoughts there were for folks like Norm Di Pasquale, who put so much energy into kind of preserving some of these public spaces. Like, they're not just landmarks; they were third spaces for people along the waterfront, or they had the
yeah,
potential to be. And um,
like
the yeah,
Hanlon's, for example, you know, like one of
yeah,
Toronto's oldest queer spaces, you know, like that Hanlon's is and for those of you who aren't familiar, like it's our, we got like a nude beach on the island that's like runs right alongside the airport, right? And it's a beloved space in this city as an important queer space, important space for a lot of people, you know. And you know, this is not insignificant to like have fucking loud ass jets now flying over, disturbing like what is one of the most peaceful spots in the city, you know. And
yeah.
there's a lot of like, you know, I feel like it's easy to be like, this is a small potatoes fight, but it's just, we're losing every goddamn fucking fight, you know. Like, he's just rewriting what the city is with no respect for for what spaces are sacred to Torontonians. You know, it's
Well,
the way he was like. I saw like a lot of the people who live on the island responding because he was essentially calling them squatters when they have, you know, had leases with the city for forever, and it's just like, you know, smaller communities. It's harder to fight back against these things, and there's no consideration for what it does to people, you know. Just, I don't know, it's just
yeah, it's hard to
frustrating.
see what folks' reaction will be like, because dealing with Ford is overwhelming as well. Like, this, you know, I hate to agree with Merritt Stiles on anything, but her response to this is like, this is a huge distraction from the actual problems the province has. And that just, obviously, my first thought, there are so many. There's so many cuts that, you know, you want to juxtaposition the spending with the cuts. And what comes to mind is our guests for our next episode on Blueprints are Canadian Federation of Students, particularly the ones working in Ontario and dealing with the cuts to OSAP, which is the student loan program. And you think about like building a healthy province, even if you're just talking economically speaking, right? Like, let's say we're not talking about, you know, the social well-being, but investing in the education of your next generations versus spending billions on a bigger, brighter convention center. Like, surely economically speaking, one is better than the other. And how hard it must be for all those folks, like students, like the safe injection sites, all these places that, devastated by cuts, look at stuff like this.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a distraction, but it's a fucking line item too that is directly impacting their well-being. Like at the cost of, sending your kid to university, but don't worry, there'll be a convention center when, billionaires want to bring business here to prop up
Yeah.
their industries that are already harmful for our communities. Like,
I
fuck.
mean, there's no question as to the economic damage that this does, right? Like, it's right now for the current like generation of students, right? You're facing your rents are as high as they've ever been, right? So like just living expenses while being a student are brutal, right? Because you can't just work full time in the summer and have the money you need, right? It just doesn't work like that. So you you really have no choice but to get yourself in massive student debt. Mind you, like 6 years ago, the average that students were graduating was already 30,000, right? So all of these living expenses piling up while as a student, making it incredibly hard to balance like a good education, and which again, like all the studies on like memory retention when you're learning, like these are no conditions for anybody to be learning anything when you're working, having to work as hard as that. Then you're not absorbing information, and you're like, students can be working as hard as they can. How much will they remember when it's all done? Who fucking knows? But then, um, on top of that, like, so you're graduating into an economy that does not have jobs for so many of you, right? Jobs it's been as bad as it's been for a long time. The jobs you get won't pay that off, so you got all of these now repayments that you have to make. That, I mean, that's just crippling for an economy, affecting the spending power of young people, forcing them to spend decades, because it was like already like the average was a decade to be able to pay them off. Again, that was 6 years ago with the OSAP program that existed 6 years ago. That did cover a lot of it. It's just crippling for a generation. There's no question that this is an incredibly short-sighted proposal, which is why so many countries around the world have learned that, like, of the economic benefit in universal free education, even for foreigners in a lot of countries, right? I mean, there's a very, very long list, like not just European countries, but in South America and Asia and Africa. There's so many countries that have that. Just you crunch the numbers, you do the math. It is an investment in the future. You don't want to cripple a generation. And I can't help but think, like, for all the young people, and I say this like a little bit from like the first person, as someone who just graduated himself after being in education for in post-secondary education for 9 years. Like, yeah, like there needs to be a level of public outrage and fight that, and this isn't like that has to extend even beyond these OSAP cuts, right? Because quite frankly, these OSAP cuts could have not happened, and students should just be equally outraged as to the kind of society that they're being forced to inherit, the social contract that they're being forced to inherit, because there is no fucking social contract. Like, there's just no opportunity for the vast majority. Maybe 10% of you will have stability, and the rest are going to be living paycheck to paycheck or worse, right? So they're like, my argument here is essentially just like, young people need to be fighting for their lives out here against what the direction that this country is going. Like, it needs to be so beyond defensive fighting and like actual offensive fighting to change the conditions for themselves, because it's not going to get better. There's no projections here. I don't think, I was talking to some students who were saying about like how there's like a bit of a hope that in 10 years from now, like, they could win like a free education. I said that 10 years ago. You know, I was like, I was talking about
That's the
that.
long, long game.
Yeah, I would 10 years ago. I thought, it's inevitable. I was like, by the time I'm out, but I didn't know I was going to be in school quite as long back then. But I thought, like, within 10 years, yeah, for sure they're going to pass free education, because that was like kind of the climate we were living in 10 years ago, before, Ford, before. And it's not even just a Ford thing, but more of a larger trend around the country. Ford is just who we're fighting with here in Ontario, but that felt inevitable, and now it has never felt further away. And it's and honestly, free education would not be enough. Just the conditions of this generation being built by just the conditions of late stage capitalism. So I was telling Jessa, like, I think students need to be gearing up for the lifelong fight here, for the fact that things are only in their lifetime going to keep getting worse as far as it's projected for the next 10, 20, 30 years, with the global crisis that are going to come in, with the state that capitalism is right now. You really don't see, there's zero reason to believe any of this will rebound, right? There's no conditions, there's no way out of it. I mean, the crypto crash is going to happen eventually, and like everyone's just holding their breath, waiting for markets to just completely drop, and the entire. I mean, you look at like what retirement in Canada is built off of, right? For the older generations, which is just on the surplus labor of the younger generations, the investments that they've made in real estate and all these things, and so who knows how that'll affect them when the time comes. But it's just, yeah, just I feel like this is a very long-winded way of saying that, yeah, students need to fucking fight, with everything they have.
And
Yeah.
not just students, right? Like you'll hear in our interview with the CFS that they are working with labor, and a few notables, the usuals, stand out to help them, OPSU and CUPE, whatnot. But, just the first comment you made when you got into that rant was like, everyone really should be outraged because of the detriment. But the reality is, I think folks are really overwhelmed with the amount of, like, one of the points that the students brought up that I forgot to be so true, was that students in particular wear so many hats, right? Like they're fighting for in Ontario, like they're fighting for it on as a worker, right? And they came out of high school, an underfunded public school system, and there's just a lot of them are really climate aware, and so they're feeling that battle, and who knows what else they're fully aware of, and having to kind of fight for, like, their health care, right? They're also patients, and like they're people too. Student is just like this other label that they've added, this other identity on top of all of their other identities that are under attack, and the funding that goes with it. But yeah, make sure you tune into Blueprints of Disruption to catch the interview with the CFS, to hear kind of where the student movement is at in Canada and in Ontario, and kind of how they're dealing with these OSAP cuts, because they are fighting back. I just yesterday, they are gearing up towards March 24th, which is a day of action for them. But yesterday they were at York University, sitting in at the financial office, trying to build momentum around their day of action and keeping it on the top of students' minds that there is a fight to be had. It's not a one-day show up, to their event fight, that it's like constant pressure that they're going to have to put down. So they talk about that in the episode with them.
Yeah. And really, like, sorry to, but like, cause I feel like I understand, like, as a student, there's so many pressures on you, right? Like, staying financially viable, like, the idea of like you feel like a clock ticking constantly, right? So the idea of anything that can threaten like your ability to survive a semester, survive the next semester, make it through your program, graduate, like especially when there's such a financial burden, like you got to make it through as short as possible because like the longer you're there, the more debt you can rack up quite easily, right? Which makes it very difficult for students to balance that. But like the conditions that they're inheriting here are just so awful that like there needs to be such a massive response beyond what we've seen. And one thing I didn't mention that like I was talking about like all these other countries where that guarantee the free education for all students. That was battles that were fought by students there's always been a history. You look as far as the history of the last several hundred years, student movements have always been at the forefront of the fight for justice, and when education was threatened, students fought back countless times around the world. And we need to be looking at that for inspiration because I feel like people need to understand the urgency because we don't have that culture here in Canada of fighting for our rights in the same way. You were mentioning like we're taught like our fights are won on the battlefield, right? Well, fuck no.
I,
but
I'm
we
sorry.
no, yeah.
I just want to explain like that I'm laughing because we're laughing, but we're to like a bit of an inside joke because I have this battle going on with my son and the education he's getting through the public school system, especially around Remembrance Day, and he keeps having to argue with his teacher. But my mom says that soldiers didn't die for our rights and freedoms. And well, my teacher, she says you're wrong, mom. And the war, when Carney was contemplating sending Canadians into this war against Iran, for the imperialists again, I was like, see, this is why I told you. Soldiers don't die for our rights and freedoms. They die for capital. We have to fight for our rights and freedoms. Me and you. Well, hopefully not you, but chances are you will too. I kept doing this so my kids wouldn't have to.
Yeah. Like, I look at even in the States, there's so many more students' movements than there are in Canada. When I was at Humber, one thing that was like really embarrassing was seeing the state of what we call our student union, which was Humber Ignite, which we would all jokingly refer to as like an event planning committee more than anything else, who might plan a movie night that two people will go to and will give you free popcorn if you follow their Instagram on occasion, but really did fuck all to fight for the rights of students. And Humber was somewhere like that, like the struggle of international students was very front and center, and Ignite did fuck all, and I have very little problem calling them out on that shit, which was, I mean, we're talking about one of the largest colleges in Ontario, if not the largest college, and I believe it might be just the largest college in Ontario. Fuck all, right? Absolute fuck all. And that's, the state that we're in so many different institutions, right? And, we, it's not to say that people aren't there fighting the good fight and doing the good work, but the truth is that there's too few of them who are doing that. There's not enough, and there needs to be so much more. Like, and as far as, labor goes, I feel, and I feel like I have to say it because I was incredibly disappointed with how Labor responded, for example, with the U of T encampment, where they talked a big game, and then the day comes and they didn't really do much to protect students. Labor can talk a big fight, but Labor has yet to really prove themselves in recent history as a force that really fights for students in these times. So yeah, there needs to be so much more, and I know that this has taken up a lot of the recording, but this feels like this is just such a big fight that needs to happen. I don't even feel like I sound as outraged as I should, which is just like the the burnout maybe talking, but like it's I cannot emphasize enough how bad things are and how much more we need to fight. And like young people need to pick up this mantle. It cannot be the same people who have been fighting this fight, because it is the same actors. We know who will be there fighting for people, and there is a core group. There is who have so many battles they're fighting, right? Like people are burnt out because they're trying to fight so many battles with such a small group of people, that if young people really realize what their conditions are, and it's critical that they get involved. It's critical that they bring some fresh energy into this fight, because we desperately need fresh energy, people who are ready to fight, who aren't as burnt out as the fucking rest of us, with that youthful energy that always is crucial to pushing the world forward. It's always the young people who bring the fresh perspectives on what the fuck is wrong with the world, and fight to make it better. And we just need that so much right now, and I'm terrified that we're not really seeing that as much as we should. Like, for relative to how our conditions are, I feel like we're just far too complacent. Anyways, that's my spiel.
It's important too, and it's the institutions know this as well. And one of the things I was going to bring up at the end, we're going to talk about the floor crossing in a second, because there's a bit of I want to unload on that. So it'll be my turn, Santiago, to go on. But the U of T students, you talked about the encampment, and since then, especially leading into this school year, and the U of T and other post-secondary institutions in Canada have changed a lot of their rules, and they are working very hard to ban protests essentially on campus. They've created new guidelines, and really the security, U of T students put out a call. They described here, I'm not going to bother sharing my screen on this one, but every time that they're on campus, they're accosted by security, and it's like hit a new level. They're documenting the harassment they're getting from security. They're acting with impunity, but also the confines that are being put on them through these new guidelines, and the threat that it means to like their education that they pay so much for. So, limits on times the protests can happen. The CFS students will bring this up as well. Like limiting where posters can go. Like they're trying to depoliticize it. Institutions, post-secondary institutions, which to me is so counterintuitive. Plus, it's all political, right? There's a certain level of politics that's assumed, right? Capitalism. That bias is everywhere and unquestioned. But, they're going out of their way to suppress the same seeds of politicization that we need for a student movement. So, again, I keep pointing back to that episode, but they do talk about like how like your shit union is the result of a whole bunch of things. Apathy could be like, in their politics, but also like attacks from the provincial government, right? Aimed at student unions, at delegitimizing them. And it's all like to a very specific purpose, because these institutions absolutely know that students, once ignited, will pose an incredible threat to the system that's been oppressing them, right? And they're doing everything they can to make sure that spark isn't ignited. And if it is, it's contained within acceptable parameters. So our hopes is that folks just disregard those parameters, but that's not without consequence. So that's part of the discussion you'll hear on Tuesday. But let's go to the like last subject, our last news item. Something a lot of progressives are talking about, especially it's happened underneath amidst a leadership race for the federal NDP. that folks would rather I not talk about. And I'm not sure I actually have talked about on a show. I save that for Twitter for the most part, or just griping to you, Santiago. But Carney is one step closer to a majority with Lori Eidlaut, the MPP from Nunavut. So Nunavut only has one riding, and she was their MP. She has crossed the floor to the Liberals. Now, this really shouldn't surprise many people, but it has. A lot of folks are indignant. You know, the Conservatives, there you'll see the headline I'm showing, are accusing Carney of making backroom deals. And to be fair, the NDP brass, like, or the interim leader at least, Don Davies, he has always maintained the same kind of position when the Conservatives cross the floor, or when there's been other kind of shifts like this, that these folks should go back for another mandate, right? They should answer to voters that you shouldn't be allowed to change parties without an election. So that is the line that they're maintaining. But the leadership candidates are essentially not saying much at all. But yeah, I mean, in terms of this specific MP doing it, is why I don't think anybody should be surprised. Like, if you believe that the NDP are progressives, they're socialists, then yes, absolutely. Why would you join a Carney government that is, you know, enacting Dodge level style austerity measures in the federal services, and is, you know, a war hawk, despite what he was saying this morning. And, you know, there's plenty of reasons that even Lori Eidlaut herself has criticized the absence of care for Indigenous folks in the North. So, and what that does to her constituents. And so from an ideological perspective, I get why people are surprised, but you know that party. You know that party is not friendly to Indigenous women. We remember what happened to their last MP, NDP MP from Nunavut, right? Complained of the party marginalizing her, mistreating her, causing her trauma. And even Lori herself, right, along with Leah Gazan, told the public, which is very rare, that they were not consulted at all when Don Davies was picked for interim leader, that they felt iced out and ignored. And then when it came to Carney's vote for the budget, his first budget, I hope y'all remember that the party manufactured this stunt where two of their members would abstain, and Lori had to be one of those people, right? And who was ostracized, rightly so, because that was essentially a vote for the budget. And so while 5 of them and all the candidates that are running for leader were able to distance themselves and say, I would never have supported that budget, they ended up giving scapegoats. So who knows what Lori was offered in terms of what position she'll get in the cabinet, or what perhaps her constituents might expect from her going over to the Liberals. But her riding was also only won by 1%. The Liberals almost won that seat by 1%. So a large part of her constituents are in fact Liberals. So it's not that far-fetched to think that she was getting calls. Because you're talking about like being now, so Alexander Boulerice, the longtime deputy leader, and the only seat in Quebec, has said that he is going to leave the party and run with Quebec Solidaire, the provincial party. He's going to go into provincial politics. So that brought them down to 6 seats. And this now brings them down to 7 seats. But the part that had me kind of chuckling in a really petty way was someone reminding me that Lori Eidlaut had only a week earlier endorsed Avi Lewis for leader. She got up on stage at that big event he had in Ottawa, where it was like who's who of provincial or progressive politics and whatnot. And, you know, the caption that Avi Lewis had to go along with that photo was like, I think I levitated that night. And he was just so hyped for all these endorsements. But he collects endorsements like with without any kind of filter, like he just gathers them like for quantity over quality. And I don't mean, he's got some really good people who do endorse him. I don't mean to slight everybody, but it was like, how much did you talk to this person? How much did they agree with your vision that they walked away from the entire party a week later? Or are you just getting people to sign up? And like, how invested are they actually in a new NDP if something like that were to happen? Or, he accepts endorsements from people like Sid Ryan, and some folks might be, oh, well, that's an Ontario labor hero. And like, sure, we can talk about that or not. But that's a man that's going on publicly with the far left does this and the wackos on the far left do that, and attacking people personally with such vitriol when they critique Lewis, and I don't know. There's other endorsements that he's gathered that were part of Jack Layton's team that worked to professionalize the party against activists who are part of the problem. And I'm just so very puzzled why his supporters refuse to see any of these as red flags. Like, they will not acknowledge any one of the issues that you bring up about Lewis. Not one. It has been nothing but deflection. And so, yeah, I had a certain sense of kind of I chuckled, thinking this is just so part and parcel that, these NDP leadership candidates have just gone on for months. Santiago, you're like, is it over yet? And I was like, soon. We're almost there. But like, it's just like this really fancy wish list. Like, this is what I would do as prime minister, blah, blah, blah. We all mock Jagmeet Singh for acting this way. And that's when he was in an election, like trying to win votes from the broader public, and making all these lofty promises on these policies that would happen when he was PM, but never talked about what you would do as an opposition party, how you would be effective with 7 seats. And they haven't changed that. That's still the discussion. It was like, well, this is what I do with pipelines, and this is what I would do with the labor sector, and here's how I would structure this, that, and the other thing. But not one of them has said, here's exactly how I'll reform that party so we don't leave out people like Lori Idlow, so that we don't have, the far left feeling like they definitely don't belong in that party. And so I think, I'm thinking Lori looked at that and thought, like, there's nothing they're promising for me or my constituents. Why not make a deal? But yeah, I know you don't give a shit either way. And I know I shouldn't either. But so many folks look to Parliament, right, as a mechanism to manipulate and find power and make change. And yeah, I think watching folks from both sides of the political spectrum flock to the Liberals just signals a complete demise of the system. Which for me, I don't see them that upset, right? I'm not upset. I hope people do start to see that it is just a consolidation of like a ruling class, and there's really no room for opposition, like a serious opposition in there. But there's you like,
I'm like, do I even comment? I'm so beyond done with all things NDP that like. I'm not even gonna give my 2 cents.
No, I don't blame you. I think they pick it'll all finally be done with once the convention is over. I do want to mention to folks that may not have heard that they actually did go and revoke Yves Ongler's membership recently. So he's now mounting a campaign to have his membership reinstated. They do have a candidate also running for president of the party. I am shocked that they have not given up their efforts as well. I thought that was the deal. If they couldn't run, they would then start to make something new. I know that kind of doesn't give you any relief, that idea either.
I mean, I also like I meet it with a certain amount of love, which is I've been there, like I definitely been like, oh fuck this fucking party, let's just start our own party. And like, I feel like it's kind of a canon event. You just gotta let it play out for people to a certain extent. We've all been there at some point, and I really I hope that they step away from the NDP out of just like how fucked that party is, how much like it's just it's just not a productive space, you know. Like they're gonna have their way with this. It's not a democratic institution. There's no room for a democratic internal process. I mean, we can try and we can. I mean, there is a critical mass point where you could say maybe, but
No, that
I'm so beyond believing in that. You know.
yeah, no. And I think the most common question that I have to answer when I shit on the NDP and I'm highly critical of like all your choices, I'm not in McPherson's campaign. You folks need to be serious. Like, I have been talking smack about her from the very beginning, and I wasn't never in Eve Ongler's campaign either. I just defended his right to be a shit disturber within the campaign. I mean, y'all should embrace that, to be honest, but they've essentially criminalized it. They're like, there's no room for you if you don't follow every one of our rules. So good luck with making change in an institution that punishes activists. But, you know, watching folks waste their time and energy on that, and then they're always like, well, what would you do, right? What's your theory of change? And like, you just want to give up on electoral politics? Again, I'm just going to
Yes.
summarize my answer. Yes is the short answer. Yes, I realize that it is still where legislation comes from, but the point that I keep trying to make to people with the podcast, with Blueprints of Disruption, is that your power is amplified outside the institutions. You are less likely to be listened to or taken as a point of pressure inside as a paying member cheerleading for your party. If you already have an orange sign on your lawn, you have a membership, you're going to convention, they don't need to listen to you. They've got you. Their energy is spent appealing to your ideological differences, right? They are capitulating to the right constantly to gain more members, right? Not appealing to the far left, right? They're distancing themselves from that. And so once you realize like tenant organizing, mutual aid groups, climate justice groups, local Palestinian solidarity groups, there are so many other places and times where you can put your energy that would be far more effective in either pressuring politicians, if that's where you think your theory of change still lies. I still don't think it does, right? Or building new systems to model us through this disaster, right? Yes, the world is ending, but a new one will begin. And what it looks like on the other side will depend on how you go through that. And if you go through that, wasting your time inside colonial institutions and learning Robert's rules, you will never have learned a new way of doing things by failure, too, right? Or what not to be. You are still feeding into and legitimizing the systems that we're trying to destroy. So every time you see me, like, it does have that hint of animosity that people are still giving millions of dollars to this party, a lot of their energy, attention, and worst, your hopes for change. I hate when folks are like, but if we don't, then when will I ever get out of poverty? If we don't, then they're going to take this right away. No, absolutely not. No, your strength does not lie within a partisan system to protect your rights. It never has. So that's a
No,
rewriting of history.
it's just a space where people go to get burnt out and lose the ability to continue to fight. I mean, we've seen it so many times with so many people, what that party does to people. Like it sucks because we want. It feels like we can't wait. You know, it feels like we need change right now, and that the quickest avenue for that is through electoral politics. but it's not an institution that cares about that at all. Like, it's not a democratic place fundamentally. It's they don't, you can pass amendments, you can try and put the right people up. They don't care. Like, the amount of people that they have expelled from being, or not even just expelled, but like blocked from being candidates, and the way that they've treated the like, look at the Sarah Jama example, right? It's just not it. And there's so much more. And like, you mentioned the money. Like, fuck, the movement could use even half of the money that the fucking NDP wastes on their bullshit. It like would go so much further in supporting all of the amazing organizations that we've interviewed, for example, here on the podcast. Like, we have so little resources out here. Like, the resource drain that the NDP represents for the movement is hurting all the work that everyone else is doing.
Yep.
It is actively holding us back. And like, it'd be great in a world where like you're like, but we can do both. Can we? Because we can't right now. Like, that just hasn't been, as long as I've been doing politics, which admittedly hasn't been all that long that I've been involved in the fight. Like, it's just approaching a decade. But it's just been like, there hasn't even been like a sign of life. There hasn't even been like something that there's not even small victories with the NDP. It's just fucking pathetic, really, what they do.
Oh, don't get them started about the dental care.
Yeah, and then you look at like the history of the NDP beyond that. Like, I mean, if they were going, like, they've had decades to get their shit together, and they seem to be only going backwards. And it's not gonna be different under Avi, man. Like, it's the same shit. Like, we believed in well, I say we and I say believed. I don't think either of those are true. But like, with Olivia, there was like some hope. And like,
not from here. We've got the podcast to prove it. We were on record going, "Run away, people! She's got no mandate. She's got no platform." Like, that is a massive red flag.
I mean, even I was on like some damage control type of shit. Like, I was like, yo, at least she won't like evict encampments, and like that was like the selling point for me. I was like, I don't think Olivia will evict encampments, and boom, go check out. I walked past the other day past St. Stephen in the Fields where they have all the concrete and the fence up. There just isn't like the amount of evictions and resilience that encampment showed, only to right now be non-existent. There is nothing there. Like, that's completely under Olivia, who is NDP royalty. Olivia's like as much of an NDP insider as it gets.
Well, next to a Lewis.
Yeah. Well,
it's like
yeah.
the legacy families
more that, so though. Yeah. But yeah.
That run the party. But let's shift away from that hellhole of an institution. And just to completely wrap it up, we like to end on bright notes. They have a tinge of darkness in them. But anti-racist networks, anti-hate networks, especially in the Niagara region, they launched a big kind of campaign when they found out that the chair of the Niagara region, Bob Gale, they had the receipts to prove this all as well, that owned a copy of Mein Kampf. And it had even been signed and authenticated by Hitler. And this is someone who runs the region of Niagara. What?
Well, he could just be a first editions collector, right?
Sure. But rather than explain it to folks, and they demanded an answer, he just resigned, which that's good too. We'll take that. You can answer to your friends that you might have on how and why you have a fucking signed copy of Mein Kampf. But just for folks who think, this isn't Canada, every time we point this out, like, it's absolutely racists running the country and funding our police systems. So he's gone now. Hopefully the library of the person who replaces them is a little bit cleaner of that shit, but you never know. I mean, what's that line from Rage Against the Machine? Those who wear crosses are the same set, or those who burn crosses, the same set. Why am I blanking on this? Anyway, we'll edit that out.
that I didn't know. I for the record, I did not know this story going in. We didn't. Did we discuss this mindset? Like this is.
This
I'm
is
just like,
blind react for Santiago.
what the fuck, man?
I guess I
And
added it to the
and the
notes. It
thing
was like
is,
this afterthought.
you could like be like some Nazis would pay good money for that. Like they must really care about that book. The
Let him
whole
rob
like
the house, then. I don't
you
care.
no, but what I mean is like you gotta really want to own that book, you know, like
Yeah.
not even like sell that, make I don't know, fucking Nazi would pay a shit ton for a signed copy of that shit. Like that's like some real like ideological like I need to own this kind of shit.
And then paid to authenticate it 8 years later. So he bought it in auction. They've got all the receipts. Bought it in auction in like 2010. The things my mind will retain without notes, and then the other things I have to look
What
up. But then in
auction?
2018, he gets it authenticated, make sure the signature's real. What I don't know, maybe he wants to sell it. But you know what? I'm still bothered by the face you gave me when I was trying to quote the Rage Against the Machine. Not because you couldn't remember the line, but because you looked at me like you had no idea what I was talking about. And
I haven't
you
listened to
introduced me to
I
Des Presidents, okay? So I'm going to introduce you a little bit of Rage. We won't play it here because that's like trademark infringement, I'm sure. But the line that I was trying to think of, which I will make you listen to later, is some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses, right? And this is like a refrain that they repeat through killing in the name of, right? But it was unacceptable that you had never heard that line
I
before.
admittedly have not listened
This
to
is a song you need to play for children, right? The next generation. It's like
I'll play it for Dio.
it will
Is
always
my
ring
child, but
true.
is also a cat and would not understand. But
My kids give the finger. Well, my oldest gives the finger to the police station when we drive by. I have a problem. I think I've gone a little too far. I need to rein him in a little bit. But we'll work on that. But also Parkdale. I did tell you about the Parkdale run strike, but you didn't need to be told about that. You live in Parkdale, and we're already excited about
love
it.
this. Yeah, the tenants over at 75 Spencer Ave are on rent strike against their Met Cap landlord who will have a little bit of deja vu because Parkdale tenants have gone on strike against Metcalf as a landlord before successfully, and I think they had to sell like 80% of their buildings in Parkdale because they couldn't deal with the strength of our community. What's up, you know? No, but it's great news. They're getting a lot of support. Parkdale Organize is doing a great job with this fight. They all just got served up N4 eviction notices, which they promptly returned to sender, but at the home of the landlord. Parkdale has a very rich history when it comes to rent strikes. It's, we've had many successful rent strikes before. Parkdale tenants are very organized, and I'm very optimistic about how this is going to go. And it's just great to see this community consistently fighting back against these fucking corporate landlords. They won't take shit, and it's such a heartwarming story for me.
They have the timeline there where they remind us back in 2017 that 300 Parkdale tenants went on strike and won, and they were fighting those above guideline increases. And so, yeah, when there's history of victories, it's much easier to then mount more resistance, right? So
Yeah,
I love when we get to share, even though they haven't won yet, the fact that they're on strike to me is a victory, right? When they've realized they have this power and they've overcome the hurdle of being afraid. They might still be afraid, but they're being brave about it, like they're stepping through that discomfort and together.
and
Yeah.
for example, the neighboring building, a bunch of their neighbors put up signs on their balconies from where they could see, in show of support, talking about how like we support your right to strike. There's a lot of solidarity in this community. There's a lot of strength. It's so much easier here when you have like such a large community. Like when it, like I think of like 55 Trailer when they were doing some shit and the whole community came out in support. Like here in Parkdale, when one building goes on rent strike, you can count on the rest of the community to have your back. So these corporate landlords who have been trying to buy up and gentrify this community, um, they live in fear. They live in fear. You should see how quickly they send service to my unit here, because I know Achilles is I shouldn't mention Achilles. My corporate landlord who has some experiencing in losing rent strikes is more scared of us because of that, and it's just this is a model that needs to be repeated across the city. Uh, you
I
know,
love how I'm able to scroll through the Parkdale Organizing's homepage, and it's one victory after another. Right? Like
yeah, that's what we
they want you to
do.
read more and you can learn more about each fight, but these are all actually different victories. Like rent evictions dropped, um, putting
More
landlords on
renovation.
notice as a group, and um, all the other attempts to organize and whatnot and fight back against mostly corporate landlords. But
Yeah, and
yeah,
we got like all
that's
of the shitty ones here too. Metcalf, Starlight, Achilles. We got plenty of shitty corporate landlords in this community who like in the last couple decades have had an effort to like buy up a historically working class community where like I believe it's like 90% of us are tenants in Parkdale too. Like this is a very tenant uh
rich.
yeah, rich community that you would like honestly looking at where we are in the city, we're by the lake, we're by the streetcar, it's a well situated neighborhood that by all measures should be far more gentrified than it is, but the community has successfully fought back for so many decades now. Like it's such an inspiring model, and I love living here. Shout out to Parkdale, don't fuck with us.
Also, if anyone from Parkdale Organizing is listening, check your DMs. We have for years been dying to have you folks on talk about community land trusts. You found a pub co-op in your neighborhood that I would love to talk to those
Shout
folks.
out to
There's so
Danu
many.
Social House.
There you go. There's so many examples in that neighborhood. I'm so jelly, right? Up here in the boonies, but that is definitely something that we'll try to bring more of to the audience so they can learn about the rent strike and the other organizing in Parkdale, because like even their legal support in Parkdale
Shout out to
is
Parkdale Legal Clinic.
is top notch. So yes, they have evaded us, but not for long. We need to bring those folks in. So if you have any other stories of victories or organizing that we should get excited about, never hesitate to reach out to us at BP of Disruption at, you know, Gmail. We actually have a Proton now. BP of a Disruption at proton.com. But also, we're all over social media. We love ideas, and don't be too shy to even invite yourself on the show if you're organizing in your community and you think you've got some blueprints of disruption that you could share with other folks. So thank you for listening to us rant about what is pissing us off this week, but also we ended on what gets us excited. That is organizing and shit disturbers. We celebrate you. Until next time.